The Grand Assembly Hall of the Vexar Concord was designed, quite deliberately, to crush the spirit of anyone who dared stand before it. I should know. I helped design the damned thing. My name is Vorik. I am, or rather was, the third adjunct to the High Council of the Vexar Concordance, which is a fancy way of saying I got to watch the real decision-makers do their jobs while I took notes and nodded at appropriate intervals. But that day, that bizarre, unforgettable day when the human ambassador arrived, I had the best seat in the entire hall to witness what would later become known as the incident that changed everything. Let me set the scene for you, because context matters, and oh, what a scene it was. The hall itself stretched nearly 400 meters from end to end, with ceilings that soared so high above us that they vanished into a carefully maintained atmospheric haze. Gravity plating beneath the obsidian floors could be adjusted to make visitors feel as though they were being pressed into the ground by the weight of worlds. The temperature regulators were programmed to shift randomly, keeping guests perpetually uncomfortable. And the lighting. The lighting was my personal contribution, a masterwork of psychological warfare that cast shadows in all the wrong places, making everyone look slightly sinister, slightly untrustworthy, slightly small. We Vexar take our intimidation seriously. On that particular morning, the 17 members of the High Council sat arranged in a massive semicircle on their elevated platforms, each one positioned precisely 3 meters above the speaking floor, forcing anyone addressing them to crane their necks upward like supplicants before gods, which was, of course, entirely the point. The human ambassador had been summoned to answer for his species' latest transgression, which, if I am being honest, was barely a transgression at all. Some mining dispute in the outer fragments, some territory that both humanity and the Concordance claimed, some resources that both sides wanted. Standard stuff, really. The kind of thing that gets sorted out with a few stern words. Some posturing, maybe a minor concession or two, and everyone goes home feeling like they won something. Except the High Council had decided to make an example of the humans. They are too comfortable. High Chancellor Threxis had declared 3 days prior, during the preliminary session I was not supposed to have overheard, but did anyway, because, well, junior adjuncts survive by knowing things. They walk our halls without proper deference. They negotiate as though they are our equals. This must end. We will remind them of their place. And so the trap was set. The human ambassador would be summoned. He would be made to understand in no uncertain terms that humanity was a junior species in a galaxy run by their betters. He would leave humbled, perhaps even humiliated, and word would spread. The other upstart species would take note. Order would be maintained. It was a good plan, a solid plan, a plan that had worked flawlessly on dozens of other species over the centuries. And then Marcus Vance walked into the hall, and everything went sideways. I will never forget my first glimpse of him. The main doors, massive slabs of polished titanium alloy that required 6 guard servitors to open, swung wide with a grinding hiss that echoed through the chamber like the growl of some ancient beast. Every species reacted to that sound with at least a flicker of instinctive fear. Every species. Marcus Vance walked through those doors as though he was entering a coffee shop. He was tall, even by human standards, probably close to 2 meters. With that peculiar build humans have, all long limbs and upright posture that looks fragile until you remember that humans come from a death world with gravity that would crush most civilized species. His hair was dark, starting to gray at the temples in that way human hair does when they reach middle age, cut short and practical. His face was unremarkable, the kind of face you would forget 5 minutes after meeting him, except for the eyes. Oh, those eyes. They were calm. Completely, utterly, almost supernaturally calm. Like still water, like deep space. Like someone who has seen everything the universe has to offer and found it all mildly interesting at best. He wore a simple suit, human style, dark blue with a white shirt underneath, and he carried nothing except a small leather case tucked under one arm. No weapons, no guards, no attendants, no ceremonial regalia. Just a man in a suit with a briefcase. The doors ground shut behind him with another ominous rumble. The atmospheric processors kicked up a notch, adding a low thrumming vibration that most species found deeply unsettling on an instinctive level. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in as many seconds. Marcus Vance did not react. He simply walked forward, his footsteps clicking softly on the obsidian floor. each step measured and even, until he reached the speaking circle at the center of the hall. Then he stopped, set down his briefcase, and looked up at the assembled council with an expression of polite attention. "Hi, Chancellor Threxus." Let the silence stretch. It was a technique he had perfected over decades, allowing the quiet to grow thick and heavy and suffocating until the person standing in the speaking circle felt compelled to fill it with nervous words, usually something apologetic and self-incriminating. Marcus Vance opened his briefcase and pulled out a notepad and pen. An actual paper notepad. An actual physical pen. Like some kind of primitive savage who had never heard of neural recording devices or holographic transcription. He flipped the notepad open to a blank page, clicked the pen twice, testing it, then looked back up at the council with that same expression of calm, polite attention. "Please," he said, his voice carrying perfectly in the vast space despite the acoustic dampening we had installed specifically to make speakers sound small and insignificant. "Begin whenever you are ready. I am here to listen." I saw something flicker across Threxus's face, just for a moment. Confusion, maybe, or irritation. Hard to tell with his species' facial structure. But then his expression hardened into the mask of stern authority he wore so well, and he launched into what I can only describe as the speech. You know the speech. Every government has one. The speech is carefully crafted to put inferiors in their place. It is full of references to ancient history, to the natural order of things, to the many ways in which the speaker's civilization is superior to the listener's civilization. It is designed to make the listener feel small, ignorant, and hopelessly outmatched. Threxus delivered the speech with the passion of a seasoned orator. His voice boomed through the hall, amplified by hidden speakers that made him sound like a force of nature. He spoke of the Concordance's 5,000-year history, of the hundreds of species that had joined voluntarily, of the peace and prosperity that came from accepting one's proper place in the galactic hierarchy. He spoke of humanity's youth as a spacefaring species, barely 300 years old, still making the mistakes that all young species make. He spoke of the mining dispute, framing it as yet another example of human arrogance, human ignorance, human overreach. It was, objectively speaking, a magnificent speech. I have heard Threxus give many speeches, but this one was particularly good. By the time he finished, I felt small and inadequate, and I was on his side. Marcus Vance had taken notes through the entire thing. Not just a few notes, extensive notes. I could see from my position that he had filled nearly 3 pages, his hand moving steadily across the paper in neat, precise lines. Occasionally he would pause, tap the pen against his lips thoughtfully, then write something else. When Threxus finally concluded with what was clearly meant to be a rhetorical question, "Do you now understand the gravity of your species' position?" Marcus Vance looked up from his notepad, clicked his pen once and said, "Yes. Thank you. That was very informative. I have several questions." Several of the council members actually recoiled slightly. I saw Adjunct Prime Kellix physically jerk backward in her seat. The concept of questions had apparently not occurred to anyone. Threxus recovered quickly. "You may ask." Marcus Vance consulted his notes. "You mentioned that the Concords has maintained peace for 5,000 years. Could you provide specific examples? I am particularly interested in conflicts that were resolved without military intervention." There was a pause. Threxus glanced at his fellow council members. "That is not relevant to the current discussion." "I see." Marcus made a note. "And regarding the mining rights in question, you stated that the Concordings claimed the territory first. Could you provide the date and method of that claim? I want to ensure our records are accurate." Another pause, slightly longer. "The territory has always belonged to the Concordants." "Always" is a long time. Marcus smiled slightly. It was not a hostile smile. It was the smile of someone who has just heard something interesting. "Could you be more specific?" I watched Threxus's neck ridges flush purple, which in his species indicated rising blood pressure and mounting frustration. "Young human, you are here to answer for your species' actions, not to interrogate this council." "Of course." Marcus nodded agreeably and made another note. "My apologies. Please continue with your questions for me. I am prepared to answer anything you wish to ask." But here was the thing, and I realized it at the exact same moment Threxus did. We had not actually planned any questions. The entire session had been designed as a one-way communication. We would speak, they would listen, They would leave properly chastened. The concept that the human might have questions of his own, might want clarification, might treat this as an actual diplomatic exchange rather than a scolding, had never entered anyone's planning. Council member Vorin, who represented the military interests and had never been accused of possessing an overabundance of subtlety, decided to take a more direct approach. "Your species is weak," he announced, his translator rendering his guttural speech into flat, declarative sentences. "You lack the fleet strength to challenge the concordance. You lack the resources to sustain a prolonged conflict. You lack the allies to support your position. These are facts. What do you have to say to these facts?" Marcus Vance looked at Vorin for a long moment, pen poised above his notepad. Then he wrote something down and said, "I appreciate your directness, Council Member Vorin. May I ask how you arrived at these assessments? I am always interested in how other species gather and analyze intelligence." Vorin's facial tendrils stiffened. "That is classified information." "Of course. Another note. I understand completely. Operational security is important, though I would point out that if your intelligence-gathering methods are classified, then the conclusions drawn from that intelligence should perhaps be presented with appropriate caveats about confidence levels and potential information gaps. Are you suggesting our intelligence is faulty?" Vorin's voice had risen half an octave. "Not at all." Marcus looked genuinely surprised at the suggestion. "I am simply noting that intelligence analysis is an imperfect science, subject to all the usual limitations of incomplete information and cognitive bias. I am certain your analysts are excellent, but surely they would be the first to acknowledge that their assessments come with some margin of error. Do they not?" The temperature in the room had dropped another 3 degrees. I was starting to shiver and I was wearing a thermal underlayer. Marcus Vance still looked comfortable. Council member Azrix, who was generally considered the most diplomatic of the group, tried a different approach. "Ambassador Vance, perhaps we are not making ourselves clear. The Concordance is offering humanity a choice: accept our terms regarding the disputed territory, acknowledge our authority in this matter, and we can move forward as partners, or refuse and face the consequences. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of reality." Marcus Vance smiled. It was a warm smile, the kind of smile you give to a friend who has just said something kind. "Council member Azrix, I truly appreciate you framing this in such clear terms. It helps enormously. May I ask what specific consequences you are referring to? I want to make sure I fully understand the parameters of this choice before I convey it to my government." Azrix blinked, all 3 of his eyes. "Economic sanctions, trade restrictions, possible military action if necessary." "I see." More notes. Marcus was on his 4th page now. "And these consequences would be applied how quickly? Immediately upon my refusal, or would there be some sort of escalation timeline? Also, would the sanctions be comprehensive or targeted? And regarding military action, could you clarify what specific actions you are considering? This information will be very important for my government's decision-making process." I could see the confusion spreading through the council like a virus. This was not how these sessions were supposed to go. The human was supposed to be afraid or angry or desperate. He was supposed to plead or bluster or try to negotiate from a position of weakness. He was not supposed to sit there calmly asking for clarifying details as though this were a business meeting. Chancellor Threxus finally had enough. He rose from his seat, all 4 of his primary limbs extended in a dominance display that had made many beings instinctively prostrate themselves. "Enough." His voice echoed through the hall like thunder. "You stand before the High Council of the Valcontuans, human. Show proper respect." Marcus Vance looked up at Threxus with an expression of mild concern. "High Chancellor, I apologize if I have given offense. That was certainly not my intention. I have been listening carefully to everything you have said, taking extensive notes, and asking questions to ensure I fully understand your position. In my culture, this demonstrates respect and serious engagement. If this is not appropriate protocol for the Concords, please tell me what you would prefer, and I will adjust my behavior accordingly." His voice never rose, his posture never changed. He simply stood there, notepad in hand, waiting patiently for guidance. And in that moment I understood what he was doing. It hit me like a physical blow, so obvious I almost laughed out loud. He was being perfectly reasonable. Aggressively reasonable. Relentlessly reasonable. He was asking all the right questions, taking careful notes, seeking clarification, treating every statement as though it were a good-faith contribution to a productive discussion. And by doing so, he was making the entire council look like raging lunatics. Because when someone remains calm while you scream at them, when someone asks thoughtful questions while you issue threats, when someone takes careful notes while you try to intimidate them, it does not make them look weak. It makes you look unhinged. Trixis must have realized it too, because he slowly lowered himself back into his seat, his neck ridges fading from angry purple to a confused gray. I see you are determined to make a mockery of this proceeding. High Chancellor, I assure you that is the last thing I want. Marcus tucked his pen behind his ear, a very human gesture. I came here today prepared to have a serious discussion about the mining dispute and to find a resolution that works for both of our governments. I have been listening to your concerns, and I have many more questions that I believe will help us understand each other better. If you would prefer to schedule another session to continue this conversation, I am happy to do that. Or if you would like to take a brief recess now so that the council can confer privately, that is also perfectly acceptable. I am here at your convenience. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the atmospheric processors humming. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear, I swear, the sound of 17 council members all having the same simultaneous realization that they had no idea what to do next. The plan had been simple. Intimidate the human, extract a confession of wrongdoing or at least acknowledgement of inferiority, send them away properly humbled. But the human refused to be intimidated. Not by refusing to show fear, that would have been understandable, even expected. No, he refused to be intimidated, by simply not acknowledging that intimidation was happening at all. He treated every threat as a request for clarification. He responded to every display of power with polite questions. He was not playing the game. Or rather, he was playing a completely different game, and we had all just realized we did not know the rules. Council member Kellix, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. She was Threxis's protégée, known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue. Ambassador, you ask many questions, but you have answered none of ours. Let me ask you directly, what does humanity intend to do about the disputed mining rights? Marcus Vance's face brightened, as though he had been waiting for someone to ask that exact question. I am so glad you asked, Council member. My government has authorized me to propose several potential solutions, and I would very much like to hear your thoughts on each one. He flipped to a new page in his notepad, one that appeared to already have notes on it. Option 1, joint development of the disputed territory with profits and resources split according to a formula we can negotiate. This would require establishing a joint oversight committee and regular audits to ensure transparency. Option 2, we agree to lease mining rights from whichever party can demonstrate a stronger historical claim pending independent arbitration. Option 3, we both agree to exclude the territory from development for a period of, say, 50 years, allowing time for a comprehensive environmental and geological survey that might reveal alternative solutions. He looked up. I have 3 more options, if none of those appeal to you, but I thought we should start with the most straightforward approaches. What are your thoughts? I saw Kellix actually glance at Threxis, uncertainty written across her features. Threxis looked at Virion. Virion looked at Azrix. Azrix looked at me for some reason, as though a junior adjunct would have any insight into what fresh hell we had stumbled into. Marcus Vance waited patiently, pen ready, that same expression of calm attentiveness on his face. We, Threxis began, then stopped. Started again. The council will need time to review your proposals. Of course, Marcus made a note. Would a week be sufficient? I know that coordinating 17 different council members must be quite challenging. I am happy to make myself available for follow-up questions during that time. Oh, and I should mention I will be forwarding a full transcript of today's session to my government along with my notes and observations. If any council members would like to provide official clarifications or corrections to anything that was said, please let me know within the next 48 hours. I want to make sure our records are completely accurate. The meeting ended shortly after that, not because anyone officially ended it, but because it simply ran out of momentum, like a machine that has been unplugged and is slowly grinding to a halt. Threxis mumbled something about reconvening at a later date. Marcus Vance thanked everyone for their time, packed up his notepad and pen, picked up his briefcase, and walked out of the hall with the same measured, unhurried pace he had entered with. The doors ground shut behind him. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. We all just sat there trying to process what had happened. Finally, Vorian broke the silence. "What in the 17 hells just occurred?" I think I heard myself say, though I had not planned to speak. "I think we just got outmaneuvered by a human with a notebook." Threxus turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "Explain." "You came prepared for an intimidation session," I said slowly, working through it as I spoke. But instead of reacting with fear or anger or desperation, he treated it as though it were a legitimate diplomatic exchange. Every time we tried to threaten him, he asked for specifics. Every time we tried to make him feel small, he responded with genuine curiosity. He took extensive notes, which means he has documentation of everything said. And now he is going to send a full transcript back to Earth, where human diplomats and analysts will spend weeks tearing apart every word we said, looking for inconsistencies, weak points, and tactical errors. I paused, then added, and he proposed multiple solutions to the actual problem, which makes us look like we are more interested in dominance displays than in actually resolving the dispute, which, to be fair, we are, but now everyone is going to know it. The silence that followed was even heavier than before. "How did we not see this coming?" Azrix asked quietly. "Because," Kellic said, and I heard something like grudging admiration in her voice, "because he did not do anything wrong. He was respectful, polite, attentive, and constructive. He asked reasonable questions and offered reasonable solutions. There is nothing in the transcripts that makes him look bad. Everything that makes us look bad we did to ourselves." Threxus stood up slowly, suddenly looking every one of his 140 years. "The human will be back next week for our response to his proposals. I suggest we spend the intervening time figuring out what exactly we are going to say to him." Meeting adjourned. As everyone filed out of the hall, I lingered behind, looking down at the speaking circle where Marcus Vance had stood. I noticed something on the floor, a small piece of paper. I descended from my platform and picked it up. It was a page from his notepad, apparently torn out and dropped accidentally. Or maybe not so accidentally. I looked at what he had written. It was not notes from the meeting. It was a checklist, each item with a small box next to it that had been carefully checked off. Let them talk first. Check. Listen without interrupting. Check. Take visible notes. Check. Ask clarifying questions. Check. Remain calm regardless of provocation. Check. Propose multiple solutions. Check. Thank them for their time. Check. At the bottom of the page, in slightly larger letters, he had written one more line. "Remember, they need something from us, or we would not be here. Be patient. Let them realize it on their own." I stood there for a long time, holding that piece of paper, and I started to laugh. I could not help it. It started as a chuckle, then grew into full, genuine laughter that echoed through the empty hall. The human had not just outmaneuvered us. He had known from the moment he walked in exactly what we were trying to do, and he had a plan for dealing with it. A simple plan. An obvious plan. A plan that consisted entirely of being professional and reasonable while we made fools of ourselves. And it had worked perfectly. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my own notepad. Something told me I was going to want to remember this day. This bizarre, humiliating, enlightening day when a human with a notebook taught the High Council of the Vexar Concortans a lesson we would not soon forget. That sometimes the most devastating weapon is not a gun or a bomb or a fleet of warships. Sometimes it is just a pen, some paper, and the willingness to stay calm while everyone around you loses their minds. I left the hall wondering what would happen when Marcus Vance returned next week, and I found myself, against all odds, looking forward to finding out. The week that followed was, without exaggeration, the strangest of my career with the Vexar Concordants. And considering I once witnessed a council member accidentally set himself on fire during a ceremonial presentation, that is saying something. The morning after Marcus Vance's first appearance, I arrived at my office to find an emergency session already in progress. Not a formal council meeting, mind you, but one of those unofficial gatherings where people who are supposed to know everything huddle together and admit they know nothing. Threxus was there, of course. So were Kelix, Azrix, and Voring. Also present were 3 intelligence analysts I had never seen before, 2 diplomatic historians, and for some reason a xenopsychologist named Dr. Marn, who specialized in predator species behavior patterns. Tell me again, Rexus was saying as I entered. Exactly what happened in that hall. One of the analysts, a nervous-looking Quellan named Rix, pulled up a holographic display. High Chancellor, we have reviewed the complete recording 17 times. The human ambassador Marcus Vance entered at 0900 hours. He remained for 42 minutes. During that time he spoke for approximately 6 minutes total. The council spoke for 34 minutes. The remaining time was silence while the ambassador took notes. And what did our behavioral analysis reveal? Drexus asked. Rix glanced at his colleagues before responding. That is the unusual part, sir. Ambassador Vance displayed no stress indicators whatsoever. No elevated heart rate, no perspiration, no pupil dilation, no micro-expressions of fear or anxiety. His breathing remained steady throughout. Even when you raised your voice, his physiological responses remained completely neutral. So he was drugged, Vorian said flatly. Some kind of chemical enhancement. We considered that possibility, Dr. Marn interjected, her 6 eyes blinking in sequence. But humans do not respond to stress reduction compounds the way most species do. Their neurology is too different. Besides, we scanned for all known substances. He was clean. Then how? Kellix demanded. How does anyone remain that calm while being subjected to the full weight of council authority? Perhaps, I said, and everyone turned to look at me, which I immediately regretted because I really had not meant to speak out loud. Perhaps he was just confident. Confident? Drexus repeated the word as though it were foreign. In his position, in his government's position, in his plan. I pulled out the paper I had found and set it on the conference table. I found this on the floor after he left. I think he meant for us to find it. They crowded around, reading the checklist. The silence stretched. This is a psychological operation, Vorian said finally. He is playing mind games with us. Is it working? Asrix asked quietly. Nobody answered, which was an answer in itself. Over the next 3 days I watched the Concordance's leadership do something I had never seen them do before. They actually researched humanity. Not the cursory intelligence briefings we usually did for new species, but deep, comprehensive analysis. And what they found disturbed them profoundly. They come from a death world. One analyst reported during a briefing on the 2nd day, Earth's gravity is 18% higher than Concordance standard. The atmospheric pressure would crush most of our member species. The planet has weather patterns that regularly produce storms capable of leveling cities, and yet humans built cities anyway. They are persistence hunters. Dr. Marn added, one of only a handful of species in known space that evolved that way. They do not have the speed or strength of ambush predators, but they have something far more dangerous. They can track prey for days, weeks even, never giving up, never stopping until their target collapses from exhaustion. Relevant how? Rexus asked. Because Ambassador Vance displayed classic persistence hunter behavior during the meeting, Marn explained. He did not try to win immediately. He simply waited, observed, took notes. He was tracking us, High Chancellor, waiting for us to tire ourselves out with our own aggression. That is ridiculous. Vorian protested. We are not prey animals. Are we not? Marn tilted her head. What happened in that hall? We expended enormous energy trying to intimidate him. We revealed our strategies, our thinking, our expectations, and what did he give us in return? 6 minutes of carefully chosen words and 5 potential solutions to a problem we had not even finished defining. Who gained more information from that exchange? The room fell silent again. I was noticing that happen a lot lately. On the 4th day, something interesting occurred. A message arrived from Earth, addressed not to Marcus Vance but to the High Council directly. It was from someone named Director Ellen Park, head of Humanity's External Relations Bureau, which apparently was the human equivalent of our diplomatic corps. The message was short, polite, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. To the esteemed High Council of the Valkar Concordance, we have reviewed Ambassador Vance's report from his initial meeting with your council. We appreciate the time and consideration you have given to this matter. Ambassador Vance has informed us that you require additional time to consider the proposed solutions to the mining dispute. This is entirely reasonable, and we are prepared to wait as long as necessary for your thoughtful response. In the meantime, we would like to extend an invitation. We are hosting a conference on resource development in contested territories next month on Earth. 23 species have already confirmed their attendance. We would be honored if the Velkar conference would send representatives. The conference will provide an excellent opportunity to discuss these issues in a broader context and to learn from the experiences of other civilizations who have faced similar challenges. We look forward to continuing our dialogue. Respectfully, Director Ellen Park, External Relations Bureau, United Earth Government. I watched Threxis read the message 3 times, his neck ridges shifting through several different colors. They are holding a conference, he said slowly, about resource disputes, with 23 other species. Next month. They moved fast, Kelix observed. Too fast, Borean said suspiciously. How could they organize a multi-species conference in less than a week? One of the analysts cleared her throat. High Chancellor, we checked. The conference was already scheduled. It has been in planning for 6 months. The mining dispute with us is apparently just one item on a very long agenda. The implications hit everyone at the same time. The humans had not called this conference in response to our disagreement. They had been planning it long before, which meant this dispute, this confrontation that we had treated as a defining moment, was to them just one small issue among many. We were not the center of their attention. We were not even particularly important. We were an item on an agenda. They are isolating us. As Rick said quietly, if we do not attend this conference, we look uncooperative. If we do attend, we are accepting humanity as a legitimate forum host for interspecies disputes. Either way, we lose. We lose more if we do not figure out how to respond to Vance when he returns in 3 days. Threxis said. He looked directly at me. Vortic, you found his checklist. You have been watching this closely. What is your assessment? Everyone turned to look at me again, and I really wished they would stop doing that. High Chancellor, I said carefully. I think we made a fundamental error in our approach. We treated Ambassador Vance as we have treated every other species that has come before the Council. We assumed that overwhelming displays of power would work. But I think humans are different. How so? They do not submit to power, I said. They measure it, assess it, plan around it, but they do not submit to it. That is not how they are built. And Ambassador Vance was never going to be intimidated by our hall or our gravity plating or our speeches, because he came from a world that is actively trying to kill its inhabitants every single day. What could we possibly do to him that is worse than being on Earth during hurricane season? Marn made an approving clicking sound. The adjunct understands. So what do we do? Threxis asked. I took a deep breath. We treat him like an equal, because whether we like it or not, that is what he is. The next 3 days were spent crafting a response, not the response we wanted to give, which would have involved a great deal more authority and a great deal less compromise, but the response we needed to give, the response that would allow us to save face while acknowledging reality. It was exhausting. When the day of Marcus Vance's return finally arrived, I was almost relieved. Almost. The same doors ground open at exactly 0900 hours. The same measured footsteps clicked across the obsidian floor. The same calm, unremarkable human in a dark blue suit carrying a leather briefcase. But this time, something was different. The atmospheric processors ran at normal levels. The temperature remained comfortable. The lighting was adjusted to be merely impressive rather than psychologically oppressive. Small changes. Subtle changes. Changes that Marcus Vance absolutely noticed. If the slight upward twitch of his lips was any indication, he reached the speaking circle, set down his briefcase, and pulled out his notepad and pen. But before he could open it, Threxis, Ambassador Vance, the High Chancellor said, and his voice was measured, controlled, almost conversational. Thank you for returning. The Council has reviewed your proposals, and we have some thoughts to share. Marcus Vance clicked his pen twice. I am listening. What followed was the strangest negotiation I have ever witnessed. Threxis presented a counter-proposal that incorporated elements of Marcus's Option 1 and Option 2, creating a joint development framework with independent arbitration for disputes. Marcus took notes, asked clarifying questions, suggested modifications. Kelix raised concerns about oversight mechanisms. Marcus proposed solutions. Asrix worried about timeline. Marcus offered flexibility. It was, in other words, an actual negotiation between equals, conducted in good faith. And it worked. After 90 minutes they had the framework of an agreement, not a complete treaty that would take weeks of additional work, but a clear path forward that both sides could accept. Marcus would take it back to Earth. The Council would formalize their position. They would meet again in 2 weeks to finalize details. As the session drew to a close, Vorkatoan, who had remained mostly silent throughout, suddenly spoke up. Ambassador Vance, I have a question that has been bothering me. Of course, Council member. When you came here last week, you were not intimidated by any of our displays. The hall, the gravity, the temperature shifts. None of it affected you at all. How, what did humanity do to prepare you for that level of psychological pressure? Marcus Vance smiled, and for the first time it was not his polite diplomatic smile. It was a genuine, warm, slightly amused smile. Council member Vorin, before I became an ambassador, I spent 15 years as a high school teacher on Earth. You could drop me into an active volcano and I would still be less stressed than I was dealing with 30 teenagers before lunch period. Your hall was very impressive, but it lacked the primal terror of a classroom full of hungry 15-year-olds who just found out their exam was moved up a day. There was a long pause. Then as Rick started laughing, it began as a chuckle and grew into full, genuine laughter. After a moment, Kelix joined in. Then surprisingly, even Threxis allowed himself a small, dry chuckle. A teacher, Rorin repeated, sounding somewhere between impressed and horrified. They sent us a teacher. They sent you a professional, Marcus corrected gently, who happens to have experience managing conflict, mediating disputes, and staying calm when everyone around him is losing their minds. Which, if I may say so, seems to be exactly what this situation required. Indeed, Threxis said, and I heard something like respect in his voice. Ambassador Vance, before you go, I am curious. That checklist you left behind last week, the one my adjunct found, was that intentional? Marcus Vance's expression became carefully neutral. High Chancellor, I am afraid I have no idea what you are talking about. I must have accidentally dropped a page from my notes, though if you did find something, I hope it was informative. Very informative, Rexis said dryly. It suggested that you knew exactly what we were trying to do and had a prepared response for every element of our strategy. High Chancellor, Marcus said, and his tone was respectful but firm. With all due respect, your strategy was not particularly subtle. The oversized hall, the elevated seating, the environmental controls, the dramatic speeches. We have historical records going back thousands of years on Earth. Humans have been trying to intimidate each other since we lived in caves. We know every trick because we invented most of them. Did you really think we would not recognize the patterns? The silence that followed was profound. But it was not an angry silence or an embarrassed silence. It was a thoughtful silence. No, Threxis said finally. I suppose we should not have. We made assumptions based on your species' age, not your species' capabilities. That was our error. It is an easy error to make, Marcus said diplomatically. Humans are good at being underestimated. We have had a lot of practice. He packed up his notepad and pen, picked up his briefcase, and turned to leave. Then he paused and turned back. High Chancellor, one more thing. That conference Director Park mentioned in her message. I hope the Concordance will consider attending. There will be several species there who have successfully navigated exactly the kind of resource disputes you are currently discussing. Their insights might be valuable. And besides, he smiled slightly, it would be nice to have you there. These conferences can get boring when everyone agrees on everything. You think we would provide entertainment? Borean asked, sounding slightly offended. Council member. I think you would provide perspective, Marcus said. The Concords has 5,000 years of experience managing multi-species relationships. That is genuinely impressive. Most species, including humanity, would benefit from learning about your successes, but you might also benefit from learning about how other species approach these challenges. No civilization has all the answers. The smart ones learn from each other. He nodded politely and walked toward the doors. They ground open, he stepped through, and they ground shut behind him. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Threxis descended from his platform, something I had never seen him do during an active session. He walked to the speaking circle, stood where Marcus Vance had stood, and looked up at the elevated council seats. "From here," he said quietly, "you all look very far away." "I, Chancellor?" Cullix asked. "I am trying to imagine standing here alone, looking up at 17 beings who are actively trying to make me feel small and insignificant, and then responding with polite questions and helpful suggestions." He turned slowly, taking in the full scope of the hall. The human was right. Our strategy was not subtle. It was obvious, and he dealt with it by simply refusing to acknowledge it was happening. That took remarkable discipline, or remarkable arrogance. Lorraine muttered. "No," Marn said firmly. "Not arrogance. Confidence. There is a difference. Arrogance would have been meeting our aggression with aggression. Confidence was meeting it with professionalism and patience. Ambassador Vance never had to prove he was strong because he was so secure in his position that our attempts to diminish him seemed irrelevant." Threxus returned to his platform but remained standing. "We will attend the conference on Earth, and we will send our best analysts, not to spy or sabotage, but to actually learn. If humanity and these other species have found better ways to handle resource disputes, we should understand their methods." "A significant shift in policy," Isrix observed. "A necessary shift," Threxus corrected. "The galaxy is changing. It has been changing for a while now, but we have been too busy maintaining our authority to notice. Species are connecting, sharing information, learning from each other. The old model of regional hegemons dictating terms to lesser civilizations is becoming obsolete. If we do not adapt, we will not collapse, but we will become irrelevant, and irrelevance is worse than collapse." Over the following weeks, I watched as the Concordance's relationship with humanity evolved from confrontational to collaborative. The mining dispute was resolved with the joint development agreement Marcus had suggested. Concordance representatives attended the Earth Conference and returned with surprising enthusiasm for several new approaches to interspecies relations. Trade agreements were signed, cultural exchanges were established. It was not a sudden transformation. The Concordance did not abandon 5,000 years of tradition overnight, but something fundamental had shifted. We had learned that there were other ways to be powerful besides intimidation, other ways to lead besides dominance, other ways to build relationships besides fear. And we had learned it from a species we had tried to intimidate, a species that had responded by taking notes and asking questions. 6 months after Marcus Vance's first visit, I was promoted. Adjunct Prime Kellix retired, and to my considerable surprise, Threxus appointed me as her replacement. My first major assignment was to coordinate with the human embassy on a joint research initiative. I found myself sitting across a conference table from Marcus Vance, both of us with notepads and pens, working through the details of scientific cooperation between our species. "I have been meaning to ask," I said during a break in negotiations. "That first day when you walked into the hall, were you actually as calm as you appeared? Or were you terrified and just very good at hiding it?" Marcus Vance smiled and leaned back in his chair. "Werdick, I am going to tell you something that very few people know. When I walked through those doors, when I saw that enormous hall designed specifically to make visitors feel insignificant, when I looked up at 17 powerful beings arranged in judgment above me, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my briefcase. I blinked, surprised. But you seemed completely calm. That is because I remembered something my mentor told me when I was a young teacher, facing my first classroom of students who were convinced they could break me. She said that fear and respect are not the same thing. Fear is what you feel when someone has power over you. Respect is what you feel when someone has earned your regard. And the secret, she told me, is that you can be terrified while still refusing to give someone power over you. You can acknowledge that they can hurt you while still insisting that they treat you with respect. He tapped his pen against his notepad, the same gesture I had seen him make during that first meeting. So yes, I was afraid, but I was not going to let that fear change how I behaved. I was going to be professional, respectful, and constructive, regardless of how the council chose to treat me. Not because I was brave, but because that was the job, and because I knew that if I stayed calm long enough, eventually they would either match my professionalism or exhaust themselves with their aggression. And if they had exhausted themselves with aggression, then I would have thanked them for their time and left, Marcus said simply, and humanity would have developed that mining territory on our own, and the Concordans would have gained nothing from the dispute except a reputation for being unreasonable. Sometimes the best way to win is just to refuse to lose. I thought about that for a long moment. Your species is very strange, Ambassador Vance. We get that a lot, he said cheerfully, but I prefer to think of it as adaptable. Humans have survived ice ages, plagues, wars, natural disasters, and at least 3 separate extinction-level threats that we know about. We are still here because we learned to be flexible, to try different approaches, to learn from everyone, including and especially people who are trying to intimidate us. And to take very detailed notes, I added. Always take detailed notes, Marcus agreed. You never know when they will come in handy. 2 years later, the mining operation in the disputed territory was producing record yields. The Joint Oversight Committee, which I co-chaired with a human administrator named James Keller, had resolved dozens of minor disputes without a single escalation to higher authorities. The Concordants and humanity were negotiating a mutual defense pact, and Marcus Vance had been promoted to humanity's chief diplomatic officer for the entire sector. I still have that checklist he left behind, framed on my office wall. Not as a trophy or a reminder of defeat, but as a lesson. A reminder that power is not just about how much force you can project, but about how you choose to use that force, or choose not to use it. The Concordance is still powerful. We still have our impressive halls and our elevated platforms and our 5,000 years of history, but now we also have something else. We have relationships built on mutual respect rather than fear. We have partnerships with species who chose to work with us rather than being forced to submit to us. We have friends instead of subjects. And we have humans. Strange, persistent, note-taking humans who refuse to be intimidated and instead respond to aggression with questions, threats with curiosity, and confrontation with professionalism. Are they annoying sometimes? Absolutely. They ask too many questions. They challenge too many assumptions, and they have an infuriating habit of being right about things they should not understand yet. But they are also excellent allies, fair trading partners, and surprisingly good teachers. They taught the Concordans something we had forgotten over 5,000 years of dominance, that real power does not come from making others fear you. It comes from making others want to work with you. And sometimes the most important lesson comes from a man in a suit with a notepad and pen, standing calmly in a hall designed to crush his spirit, and simply refusing to play the game everyone expected him to play. I saw Marcus Vance last month at a diplomatic reception. He was surrounded by representatives from a dozen different species, all of them listening intently as he explained something on his ever-present notepad. I caught his eye across the room, and he smiled and raised his pen in greeting. I smiled back and raised my own pen in response, because I had learned something from him too. I had learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a gun or a ship or even authority. Sometimes it is just the patience to stay calm, the wisdom to ask the right questions, and the courage to treat everyone with respect even when they are trying very hard not to deserve it. The Vexar Concordans tried to intimidate the human ambassador. He just took notes, and in the process he changed everything. Not through force, not through threats, not through dramatic confrontation. He changed everything by being exactly what the situation required, a professional who refused to be anything less than professional, regardless of how anyone else chose to behave. And that I have come to believe is the most human thing of all.